My wedding was an epic act of revenge. Imagine your wedding day not as a celebration of love, but as the meticulously planned ground zero for a family apocalypse. Tonight, you'll witness how decades of psychological warfare culminated in a jaw-dropping public spectacle paid for by the very people who tried to destroy me. This isn't just a story, it's a blueprint for ultimate vindication, and you won't believe how sweet revenge truly tastes. My parents wanted my sister to walk down the aisle first at my own wedding in a wedding dress, so my husband and I orchestrated the most devastating revenge that destroyed them in front of our entire family while we got the wedding of our dreams on their dime. This isn't just family drama, it's the nuclear explosion that ended decades of psychological warfare where I was the target and my sister was the weapon they used to destroy my soul piece by piece. From my earliest memories, I lived in a house where love was poison and I was force-fed rejection daily. My parents didn't just prefer my sister, they treated her like a goddess while I was the family punching bag they kept around for target practice. When she accused me of something, I was immediately destroyed without trial or mercy. When I accused her of anything, even with video evidence, they would twist reality until somehow I was the villain who deserved punishment for daring to speak against their precious golden child. The systematic torture was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. My birthday cakes had to be flavors that made me gag, while she smiled, watching me choke down celebration that tasted like punishment. She got more money, better curfews, complete freedom, while I was imprisoned at home like a criminal serving a life sentence for the crime of existing. When I dared point out these glaring injustices, my parents would gaslight me with excuses that shifted faster than a con artist's story. First claiming age differences, then when I reached those milestones, suddenly it was because I was untrustworthy due to my horrible judgment. The boyfriend sabotage campaign was psychological warfare at its most vicious. Every boy I brought home became prey for my sister's pathetic seduction attempts, which she would then weaponize into accusations that they had tried to assault her innocence. My parents swallowed her lies like gospel truth every single time, banning me from dating these predators while treating her rare boyfriend like visiting royalty. The pattern was so predictable it became its own form of torture. Hope followed by inevitable destruction, over and over until I stopped believing love was possible. But here's where their master plan to crush my spirit backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. They had trained me too well to expect nothing from them. Years of systematic psychological abuse had turned me into a survivor who planned for war while they thought they were raising a victim. While they were busy destroying my self-worth, I was secretly building an escape route they never saw coming. When college time arrived, their financial favoritism became a nuclear weapon aimed directly at my future. They announced with smug satisfaction that they would fund everything for my sister's acceptance into a mediocre college, while I would work like a slave and maybe, possibly, if I was very good and very lucky, they might consider helping me after she graduated. They expected tears, begging, perhaps a complete emotional breakdown that would give them months of entertainment. Instead, I smiled and said, okay. The confusion on their faces was priceless because they had no idea I had been preparing for this betrayal since childhood. While they were busy playing favorites, I had been earning a full scholarship that would become my Declaration of Independence and the foundation for the most satisfying revenge plot in family warfare history. When I finally met my future husband, a man who lived for drama and never met a fight he wouldn't finish,
All the pieces were perfectly positioned for the ultimate destruction of parents who had spent decades believing they were untouchable. They had no idea they had just armed their greatest enemy, a daughter with nothing left to lose, and a partner who specialized in making people pay for their cruelty.
But the tragedy was about to escalate into the most unbelievable betrayal that would make decades of favoritism look like child's play. When my husband and I announced our engagement and decided to hold the wedding in my hometown for convenience, my parents naturally demanded to meet the man who had dared to marry their disappointing daughter without their approval. I wanted to refuse, knowing they would try to poison him against me like they had with every previous boyfriend, but the distance had softened my memories of just how toxic they could be. My husband, however, was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of meeting them. This man who lived for confrontation had been preparing for psychological warfare since the day I told him about my family. He had even purchased a high-quality hidden recorder, fantasizing about capturing my sister's inevitable seduction attempts and then broadcasting her humiliation to our entire extended family. The thought of verbally destroying people who had spent years destroying me had him grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. So off he went, alone and armed for battle, expecting the usual script of my sister batting her eyelashes and my parents questioning his worthiness. What he encountered instead was so far beyond anything we could have imagined that when he returned home, he was practically bouncing off the walls with manic energy. "Babe, babe, you won't believe the insane shit they just proposed," he shouted, his eyes wild with the kind of gleeful disbelief that comes from witnessing something so outrageous it defies human comprehension. Instead of the predictable flirtation attempts we had prepared for, my parents and sister had sat him down for what they clearly believed was a generous negotiation. After the usual grumbling about not approving of him and questioning my judgment in men, they dropped a bombshell that left even my drama-loving husband speechless with shock. They announced they were willing to pay for our entire wedding, covering every expense we couldn't afford on our modest budget. But their generosity came with one small, reasonable condition that surely any loving family would understand. My sister would walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress, at my wedding. Their justification was delivered with the straight-faced seriousness of people who genuinely believed they were solving a tragic family crisis. It simply wasn't acceptable for a younger sister to get married before an older one, they explained, so the only fair solution was for my sister to have the experience of walking down the aisle first. She would wear a wedding dress, have professional photographs taken, and even have her own cake-cutting ceremony afterward. They painted this as a beautiful family compromise that would allow both daughters to feel special on what was supposed to be my wedding day. My husband later confessed that his brain completely short-circuited when they delivered this proposal with the genuine enthusiasm of people offering a wonderful gift. Even his catalog of devastating insults temporarily disappeared as he processed the sheer audacity of parents who wanted to turn their daughter's wedding into a dress-up party for their favorite child. But something whispered in his soul like the devil himself. String these people along and make them pay for decades of abuse in the most spectacular way possible. "I need to think about it," he managed to say, fighting to keep his expression neutral. "Let me see how she reacts to the idea." Then he practically ran out of there before his barely contained glee could give away the nuclear revenge plot that was already forming in his mind. When he recounted their proposal with barely suppressed excitement, I was initially shocked that even they would go this far. But as the reality sank in, something shifted inside me from hurt to something far more dangerous. The cold, calculating fury of someone who had finally been pushed too far and was ready to push back with interest. Right at that moment, my husband and I transformed from shocked victims into strategic masterminds plotting the most elaborate wedding revenge in family history. The audacity of their proposal had awakened something primal in both of us, a hunger for justice that had been building for decades and now finally had the perfect target. We spent hours brainstorming increasingly outrageous schemes, from giving them fake venue addresses to hiring actors to play fake family members who would publicly shame them. Our imaginations ran wild with possibilities for making them pay. However, when we called my husband's level-headed brother to run our plans by someone with functioning impulse control, he quickly shot down our more dramatic ideas. While he completely understood our desire for revenge and even admitted he would want the same thing in our position, he pointed out that some of our schemes could result in lawsuits or criminal charges that would ultimately hurt us more than them. We needed something that would destroy them socially while keeping us completely in the legal clear. The final plan was beautifully simple in its elegant cruelty. We would pretend to agree with their proposal, let them pay for everything, hire security to keep my sister out, and then watch them try to explain their way out of the humiliation when they had no proof we had ever agreed to their insane scheme. But the real genius came from my husband's strategic mind, which saw an opportunity not just for revenge, but for profit at their expense. He returned to my parents with the performance of his life, claiming he had probed me about the idea and discovered I wouldn't be receptive to it. However, he personally didn't see the issue with their proposal and wanted to help them make it happen without causing family drama. He pointed out that I hate conflict and might not throw a tantrum in front of all our wedding guests, but marriage is such a big deal that my reaction could be unpredictable and potentially explosive. His suggested compromise was pure psychological manipulation at its finest. They would help pay for wedding expenses to make me feel grateful and obligated, which would pressure me into accepting their surprise without making a scene. My parents looked surprised by his reasoning, but my sister literally started skipping with joy like a child who had just been promised a trip to Disney World. The image of a grown woman bouncing around because she was going to ruin her sister's wedding was both pathetic and infuriating. But here's where my husband's strategic brilliance truly shone. He convinced them that because I was supposedly controlling and paranoid about cheating, constantly checking his phone and monitoring his communications, absolutely nothing about this plan could ever be put in writing. Any discussions about my sister's role in the wedding had to happen in person at their house, with no text messages, emails, or any other digital evidence that could later be used against them. What followed were months of the most satisfying psychological warfare I had ever witnessed. While my parents thought they were secretly planning to humiliate me on my wedding day, my husband was systematically extracting every penny possible from them. We would visit venues and select the cheapest options, only for my husband to secretly bring my sister back to try the expensive alternatives. He would sigh about how unfortunate it was that we couldn't afford the premium choices, prompting my sister to demand my parents pay for the best of everything so she could enjoy it during her moment in the spotlight. The image of a grown woman bouncing around because she was going to ruin her sister's wedding was both pathetic and infuriating. But here's where my husband's strategic brilliance truly shone. He convinced them that because I was supposedly controlling and paranoid about cheating, constantly checking his phone and monitoring his communications, absolutely nothing about this plan could ever be put in writing. Any discussions about my sister's role in the wedding had to happen in person at their house, with no text messages, emails, or any other digital evidence that could later be used against them. What followed were months of the most satisfying psychological warfare I had ever witnessed. While my parents thought they were secretly planning to humiliate me on my wedding day, my husband was systematically extracting every penny possible from them. We would visit venues and select the cheapest options, only for my husband to secretly bring my sister back to try the expensive alternatives. He would sigh about how unfortunate it was that we couldn't afford the premium choices, prompting my sister to demand my parents pay for the best of everything so she could enjoy it during her moment in the spotlight. The same strategy worked for photographers, flowers, catering, and every other wedding expense.
My parents, believing they were investing in my sister's big moment, happily paid for the most expensive wedding we could have never afforded ourselves.
No one expected that our wedding day would begin with my husband delivering Oscar-worthy performance art, while my parents prepared for what they believed would be their daughter's moment of ultimate triumph. The morning started with careful choreography, as my husband made his final visit to my parents' house, carrying fabric scraps from my dress alterations as proof that he had successfully sabotaged my wedding gown. He told them I was in a complete rage about the ruined dress, and he needed to rush back to calm me down before the ceremony, selling the story with just the right amount of panicked concern. Meanwhile, we had positioned our security strategically around the venue, initially keeping the hired bodyguard hidden so my parents wouldn't suspect anything unusual. To them, it looked like a normal wedding setup with just a woman checking names at the entrance. Only after my parents arrived and settled into their seats did we reveal our secret weapon, a professional security guard who looked like he could bench press a small car and had been specifically instructed to deny entry to anyone matching my sister's description. The timing had to be perfect, and every family member had been given their role in the elaborate theater we were about to perform. My bridesmaids were told to follow my father's lead without question. A friend not in the wedding party was positioned to create strategic chaos at exactly the right moment. And my father-in-law had been warned he might need to step in as backup if things went sideways. The stage was set for the most spectacular family meltdown in wedding history. When the moment arrived, my parents received the text that my sister was 5 minutes away, prompting my father to stand up and signal for the ceremony to begin. My bridesmaids, following the predetermined plan, walked down the aisle and took their positions, while my father positioned himself at the entrance like a proud parent waiting to escort his daughter. The bridal music began playing, the doors opened with dramatic flair, and instead of my sister making her grand entrance in a wedding dress, I appeared in all my actual bridal glory. The look of absolute horror on my father's face was worth every moment of planning and deception we had endured. He stared at me in complete confusion, then desperately tried to see behind me to locate my sister, but the venue layout made it impossible to see what was happening at the entrance. His phone immediately started ringing with my sister's caller ID, and in a moment that revealed everything about his priorities, he abandoned me at the altar with a mumbled "something came up" and rushed off to deal with whatever crisis was unfolding outside. The gasps and confused whispers from our wedding guests created the perfect backdrop for the performance we had rehearsed. Our planted friend loudly asked what had happened, and through genuine tears that mixed acting with real hurt, I delivered the line we had prepared. He told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. The pain in my voice was authentic because, despite everything, some part of me hadn't believed my father would actually abandon me at the altar for my sister, even knowing the plan. The friend then shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. What did he mean by "it shouldn't be you," before dramatically announcing she would go investigate and running toward the entrance? Her mission was to create maximum chaos with the security guard and prevent my father from returning to stop the ceremony, while also ensuring as many guests as possible witnessed whatever was happening outside. As my mother also fled the scene to join the drama, my father-in-law sprinted toward me with the desperate urgency of a man trying to save a sinking ship. Watching him run to my rescue helped me smile through the tears, and when he took my arm with gentle determination, I knew that no matter what happened next, I was finally surrounded by people who actually cared about my happiness. The whispers continued as guests tried to piece together what was happening, but my husband was waiting at the altar with a grin that promised this was just the beginning of the most satisfying revenge story ever told. But the tragedy was about to transform into the most spectacular public humiliation my family had ever witnessed. While my husband and I exchanged vows inside the venue, a nuclear-level meltdown was unfolding outside that would become family legend for generations. According to the gleeful reports from multiple witnesses, my sister had arrived in full bridal regalia, expecting to make her triumphant entrance, only to be stopped cold by our security guard, who calmly informed her she must be at the wrong venue since there was already a bride inside. The scene that followed was beyond anything we could have scripted in our wildest revenge fantasies. My sister, a grown woman in her 20s, literally threw herself on the ground and began kicking her legs while screaming like a toddler having the ultimate tantrum. She sat on the pavement in her expensive wedding dress, sobbing hysterically and demanding to know why she wasn't being allowed into her wedding ceremony. The security guard, earning every penny of his generous tip, maintained his professional composure while this adult woman had a complete psychological breakdown in front of a gathering crowd of wedding guests. When my father arrived and tried to threaten the security guard with police involvement, claiming he had never heard of him and demanding proof he was authorized to work there, the guard calmly agreed to call the police since he was hired by us and was simply doing his job. The realization that calling authorities would only delay things further sent my father into his own spiral of panic and rage as he watched his elaborate plan crumble in real time. That's when our planted friend arrived like a venging angel, immediately beginning to scream at my sister and demanding explanations for why she was wearing a wedding dress to someone else's wedding. Her strategic stalling gave other guests time to emerge from the venue, creating an ever-growing audience for the family circus that was unfolding. When my mother joined the chaos, the scene reached peak insanity, with 3 family members trying to explain the unexplainable to an increasingly horrified crowd of relatives and friends. Faced with complete exposure and no way to salvage their plan, my parents threw my husband under the bus with desperate fury, insisting he had been part of the scheme all along. But when my husband was summoned from inside, he delivered the performance of his lifetime. With the innocent confusion of a man hearing the most ridiculous accusation imaginable, he denied everything with such convincing bewilderment that even I would have believed him if I hadn't known better. "Why would I ever agree to something so insane?" he demanded, his voice carrying the perfect mix of outrage and disbelief. When they insisted he had agreed to let my sister walk down the aisle first, he challenged them to produce any evidence of such an agreement. Of course, they had nothing, no texts, no emails, no recorded conversations, because he had brilliantly convinced them to keep everything verbal to avoid my supposed paranoia about his communications. The family members who had witnessed this train wreck were absolutely savage in their condemnation. They ripped my parents apart with questions that had no good answers. Why would any sane person agree to let someone else wear a wedding dress at their wedding? Why was there no proof of this alleged agreement? What kind of parents would even suggest such a thing? My parents had no response that didn't make them sound completely deranged. Meanwhile, my sister continued her public meltdown, now screaming accusations that my husband was a liar and a manipulator, while literally sitting in the dirt in her ruined wedding dress. The contrast between her unhinged behavior and my husband's calm, reasonable denials made it crystal clear who was telling the truth. My father looked like he might attempt physical violence, but other family members held him back while security stood ready to intervene. The beautiful irony was perfect. After years of them accusing me of things and never being believed, they were finally experiencing the helpless frustration of telling the truth while everyone assumed they were lying.
Right at that moment, as my parents were finally forced to drag my screaming sister away from the venue in complete humiliation, the most beautiful part of our revenge was just beginning to unfold inside the reception hall. Our wedding guests, who had witnessed varying degrees of the outdoor chaos, seemed determined to make up for the family drama by showering us with extra love and attention. Whether it was guilt over what they had seen or genuine happiness for us finally escaping that toxic environment, everyone made an extraordinary effort to celebrate our union with infectious joy and enthusiasm. My husband spent the first hour of our reception trying to maintain his fake angry expression, but eventually broke character and started grinning like a man who had just won the lottery. "All that expensive food and drink they're enjoying certainly helps their mood," he whispered to me as we watched our guests feast on the premium menu my parents had unknowingly funded for their own public humiliation. The irony was delicious. They had paid thousands of dollars for a party celebrating the very people they had tried to destroy. The post-wedding communications were even more satisfying than the wedding day itself. My parents and sister began a campaign of desperate phone calls and increasingly unhinged messages, trying to salvage some dignity from their spectacular failure. When I refused to answer their calls, following my husband's brilliant strategy of maintaining a paper trail, my sister finally resorted to a text message that was so deranged it read like evidence for psychiatric evaluation. She blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake that fooled them for months, a description he immediately wanted to print and frame, and declared with absolute certainty that he would eventually cheat on me. In a final desperate attempt at psychological warfare, she even suggested that he was already cheating on me with her, apparently forgetting that everyone had witnessed her pathetic attempts at seduction being rejected for months. My husband's response was pure genius. He screenshot everything: the call logs, my sister's insane message, my parents' demands that I answer their harassment, and sent it all to our extended family group chat. He crafted a message begging our relatives for help, explaining that we were being constantly harassed by my parents and sister now that they had failed to ruin our wedding. He asked them to help stop the harassment so we could enjoy our honeymoon in peace. Then came the masterstroke that sealed their fate forever. He finished his plea by asking family members not to share our location, claiming he was afraid my parents might send my sister to our honeymoon suite and then insist he had somehow agreed to sleep with her there too. The absurdity of the statement, combined with all the evidence of their actual behavior, made it clear that no accusation against them was too ridiculous to believe anymore. Our extended family rallied around us with protective fury, apparently delivering consequences to my parents that were swift and decisive. The harassment stopped immediately, leaving my husband slightly disappointed that my sister hadn't disobeyed so he could publicly destroy her again on social media. But the silence was golden, representing the first time in my life that my parents had actually faced real consequences for their toxic behavior. As I write this from our European honeymoon, paid for with money we saved by getting our dream wedding completely funded by the people who tried to ruin it, I can finally say that justice was served. After decades of being the family scapegoat, I not only escaped their control, but got them to pay for my freedom. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything you wanted while watching your enemies destroy themselves trying to stop you.
Sometimes the most toxic families create the most determined survivors. I learned that the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's letting horrible people expose themselves while you profit from their destruction. When you've been broken by family, true healing comes from watching them finally face the consequences they spent years avoiding. The sweetest victory isn't getting even. It's getting everything you deserved while they destroy themselves trying to stop you. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And subscribe to join our community of resilient souls who've learned that sometimes being underestimated is your greatest superpower. Together, we're writing new endings to old stories, and I can't wait to share the next chapter with you.